All right, we have breaking news now. Just heard from the Richland County Courthouse. The jury has reached a verdict in the double murder trial of Brett Parker.
This is a very highly publicized trial. It has been in the hands of the jury, and the court case has been in front of the public for at least the last going on 3 weeks. And so we are live there. J.R. Berry is standing by outside of the courtroom. And of course, there was a fury of activity as folks tried to get back into the courtroom to hear that verdict.
And you know what? Only 3 hours is not a lot of deliberation at all for the jury. I'm personally kind of surprised by that, Darcy. When you have the fact that it's a double murder case right now, you would think that it would take more. So obviously the jury agreeing in what they heard in the testimony. They did, however, ask to come back in the courtroom just about 20 minutes now. This is a live picture we want to tell you that you're looking at. The jury did ask to come back in the courtroom just about 20 minutes ago. They wanted to hear the testimony from the 2 people who were first on the scene. There was one Richland County Sheriff's deputy that they wanted to hear the testimony from. Once they heard that, the 4 men listened to they listened to it for a little bit, and then the 4 men told the judge that was good. They got what they needed. Just a tweet out there from Dakari Turner, who is in the courtroom, saying that Tammy Parker's family in the courtroom right now saying a prayer, awaiting the jury to read the verdict.
As we just mentioned, J.R. Berry is standing by live outside the courtroom. This is a live look in. J.R., we know that they had a question. The jury had a question. They posed it. It was answered. And just minutes later, they were coming forward to say that they had made a decision.
Yeah, you know, they actually deliberated for about 2 hours, from 4:30 until about 6:30, and then the question. They wanted to rehear some of that testimony, and they brought the jurors back in, and they did that up until about 10 minutes after 7 o'clock. So that wrapped up about 25 minutes ago, and then the jurors simply went back to deliberate even more, Darcy and Andrea. In fact, the judge, we were being told, was going to ask them, do you want to continue to deliberate tonight? Do you think you can come to a verdict tonight, or do you want to call it a night? No response from the jury, except just a few moments ago with the breaking news that they have in fact reached a verdict in this very high-profile double murder case. So actual deliberation, ladies, well, from about from about 4:30 till about 6:30, and then about 20 more minutes. So a little more than 2 hours of deliberation. You know, we mentioned this on the 7 o'clock broadcast. 13 days of testimony here. 13 days. That is a long time for a jury to sit there and hear evidence in a case. The prosecution maintaining all along that the motive in this has been insurance money to help Brett Parker get out of some gambling debts. And of course, Brett Parker and his defense team saying this is nothing more than self-defense, that Brian Kapnahurst killed his wife, and so he in turn killed Brian Kapnahurst. But yeah, remarkable, a very, very fast decision here at the Richland County Judicial Center.
J.R., we know that you are standing outside of courtroom 2A, so obviously you can't see that live picture inside like what we can see and what the folks at home can see. But can you tell me about the people who are going back into the courtroom other than the prosecution and the defense?
You know, we've had the family members of Brian Kapnahurst. They have been out here. They've been hustling back in. I talked with some family members of Tammy Parker a few moments ago. They're also hustling back into courtroom 2A behind me. A lot of people, after the testimony was listened to, after the jury reheard that testimony, a number of people, including members on both sides of the Parker family and the Kapnahurst family, a lot of them broke and left. They were going to go grab a bite to eat. They figured this might be a little while. But just moments, I mean, just literally moments after they heard that testimony, reheard the testimony from those 2 Richland County Sheriff's investigators, a verdict in this case. And yeah, it's quite stunning that after so many days of testimony, after so many witnesses, after this thing has gone on now for more than 3 weeks, that a verdict comes back after deliberating a little more than 2 hours.
J.R., we understand that, like we just said, that the jury asked to hear some statements again. They wanted to hear from Lieutenant Odom and also Joseph Ryan, who were the first at the scene. Deputy Joseph Ryan, that is, with the Richland County Sheriff's Department, who was first on the scene. I know you've been in and out of the courtroom, but do you know what piece it was that they were listening to, or at what point did that jury foreman said, okay, that's enough, we got what we needed?
I don't exactly know what that was, Andrea, but I do know that one of those officers in the testimony that was played back was saying the demeanor of Brett Parker when they showed up at the scene, saying that Brett Parker was angry and that he was spitting and he was mad. So I do know that one of those investigators' testimony included that testimony in front of jurors. They couldn't look at this testimony. They had to rehear it again. It wasn't entered physically into evidence. You can't do that. So they had to actually come back and listen to the audio tapes and listen to what these two investigators had to say. But yeah, they were talking about the demeanor of Brett Parker, what they saw when they first showed up at the scene, and just abruptly in the middle of that testimony, they were saying, that's enough. We've heard enough. And they went back and deliberated just a handful of minutes, and now they're back with a verdict.
JR, this has obviously been a very emotional trial. We've heard from Brett Parker. He was removed from the courtroom after having what his family called a panic attack. We've heard from his daughter in the courtroom as well. Obviously very emotional. And what the defense is saying is that Brett Parker fired on Brian Kapnahorst after Kapnahorst killed his wife. These kinds of trials are especially difficult for the family, and no verdict will be the right verdict for either side of that family.
You know, the Parker family firmly believes what they believe. The Parker family, Jack Parker and all of his family, believe in the innocence of Brett Parker. The Kapnahorst family, well, they believe differently. And the family of Tammy Parker, they have their own thoughts in this as well. This has truly been a very hard case. It's been a high-profile case. Just looking at some of the things that have happened in this case, in this trial since it started. The shootings taking place on Friday, April 13th, and then it was weeks later, and I mean weeks later, before an arrest was made in this case, and only after Sheriff Leon Lott testified that he went to the home of Brett Parker on 5 different occasions and told him, your story is not matching up with the evidence in this case. Simply not adding up. And he convinced him to turn himself in after that 5th and final visit. Jack Parker, thrown out of court, allegations that he made some sort of contact with jury members. Jack Parker, of course, the father of the defendant here, Brett Parker. Emotional testimony with Brooke as well. Brooke Parker, the 14-year-old daughter of Tammy and Brett Parker. I know some family members. Tammy's sister was commenting on Facebook after Brooke testified of how horrible it was to sit there and hear her
JR, we want to interrupt you for just 1 second, JR. We're looking at a live picture right now from the courtroom in Richland County. We can see that Judge DeAndre Benjamin has just come in and sat down at the bench. There's some activity. We can assume that that sound might be, Darcy, the jurors coming in?
The jurors coming in as well, and as you can see for yourself, the folks sitting at the table closest to your screen would be the prosecution. Further away would be Brett Parker's defense table. We were allowed to stream the verdict live. Earlier we heard from the judge that she did not want live video coming out of the courtroom during the proceedings, and so this is the first time that we're getting an opportunity to actually look into courtroom 2A and the Richland County Courthouse for this double murder. We're going to stop for just a moment and just listen in as we hear from the defense table.
Well, you can.
Jury seated, Your Honor.
All right, and before we receive the verdict from the jury, I'm going to ask that for those of you who are seated in the audience, that there not be any outbursts, and you all need to remain seated until I dismiss the jury. All right?
Well, that was obviously a moment that we're having a little bit of audio difficulties now. JR, we were just in the courtroom and saw the judge come back and sit down, and it appears as though the verdict was about to be read, but we're having some audio issues.
Yeah, we do apologize for that. We're going to see if we can send Eric, and Eric, if you would just go ahead and see if you can stick your head in there. We're going to see if we can get this verdict to you as soon as it is read, as soon as it is announced. A lot of speculation that this could have taken a day or two or even more, Darcy and Andrea, because of so much testimony, so many days of this case. So you're looking at 2 hours plus of deliberation, 2 hours plus of deliberating this case, and the jury now with that verdict, and we are awaiting word just like you are on whether he is guilty or if he's innocent.
You know, something that you don't see very often in a case like... Okay, just hearing now from the courtroom, it is guilty. The verdict has been reached. It is guilty on both counts. Brett Parker, now the jury has spoken, guilty on both counts of murder.
Brett Parker found guilty in the murders of Tammy Parker and Brian Kapnahurst, and we heard earlier from legal experts that a quick return from the jury usually does mean that they side with the prosecution. Again, J.R. Berry live right outside of courtroom 2A. This has been a very emotional case for the last 3 weeks. Dakari Turner has been in the courtroom, and so as we said a little bit earlier, this is definitely a win for the Kapnahurst family and for Tammy's family, but a loss for Parker today.
You know what, like you just said, most of the time legal analysts do say that a short verdict means that it's a guilty verdict, and a lot of times that means that there isn't that one holdout. It only takes one person on a jury to disagree and find somebody not guilty or find reasonable doubt for both of those murders in order to hold up a verdict, to keep them going for several days, and then to eventually come to a hung jury like we just saw in the sentencing phase of the Jodi Arias trial. They were not able to reach a decision. So when we heard that they had only been deliberating for 3 days, or 3 hours, when you compare that to the fact that there was 13 days of testimony and they were able to make a decision within 3 hours, you kind of had a feeling that it was going to be a guilty verdict. Something else that was unusual in this case was Brett Parker taking the stand in his own defense. Very often that does not happen. They are too afraid. There you go. There you see the video of him on the stand. Very often defense attorneys are too afraid of what their client might say on the stand, or say something to incriminate him, or get mixed up on his facts and rub the jury the wrong way is something that legal analysts talk about a long time. You know, you'd like to think that always things are based just on the facts, but at the end of the day, these are jurors, these are people. There's a likability factor. Do I believe him? Do I believe what he's saying? Does he seem like a credible witness? I know on the day that he took the stand, the prosecutors were very harsh in their cross-examination of the exact facts of what happened when he allegedly saw his wife being murdered. I don't think one time on the stand he said he saw it. One time on the stand, you know, he said, well, I was a man that was upset at the time because I had just seen my wife murdered. And then another time he talks about seeing Tammy's his wife's feet sticking out of the bathroom door, and saying he realized something was very wrong. So on cross-examination that day, the prosecutor really pushed on that point. Which was it? Did you see your wife Tammy get murdered, or did you see your wife Tammy's feet outside the bathroom door and realize then that there was a problem? So him taking the stand in his own defense was something very unusual in this case, and only 3 hours of deliberation. Obviously they didn't have a hard time in agreeing that he was guilty.
An emotional response from the courtroom when the verdict was read. Gasp, tears from both sides of the case. The jury less than a minute ago being polled, and these are tweets that we're getting out of the courtroom at this hour. Obviously the defense is going to try to lobby some type of defense to get a retrial, get this whole thing thrown out, have another chance to prove that Brett Parker is innocent. But
there'll be an appeal, of course. There'll be an appeal.
And we'll move forward from there. But as you can see for yourself right there on your screen, Brett Parker found guilty on both counts of murder, found guilty of killing his wife Tammy and of his business/gambling partner Brian Kapnahurst.
There you see in the pictures right now Brett Parker speaking to or being cross-examined by his own defense attorney. Now the big point that they were trying to make was the fact that Brett Parker gave Brian Kapnahurst a gun. That was one of the key things that the defense wanted you to believe. They wanted you to believe, according to Brett Parker's daughter, 14-year-old daughter, she overheard a conversation saying that Brian Kapnahurst had a gun. Meanwhile, When Brian Kapner-Hurst's wife, widow, took the stand, she said he didn't like guns, Brian didn't own guns, and that he was not a fan of guns. So the widow of Brian Kapner-Hurst completely contradicting what the 14-year-old daughter had said, saying no, she knows her husband, and her husband didn't own a gun and didn't like guns, and therefore would have never had a gun when he was going over to the home of Brett Parker that day. She also testified that he knew he might be in trouble that day. The widow of Brian Kapner-Hurst on the stand said that his Brian, before he left the house, told her, listen, if I don't come back in 30 minutes, or if I don't come back, call the police. Something has gone very wrong. He, however, was happy when he found out that Tammy Parker was going to be home when he was going over there to collect the gambling debt that day, thinking that that would make him safe. Obviously, it turned into a terrible situation where nobody was safe.
Just before we went back to the courtroom video, what we were looking at, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the case, is video of the home where the murders did take place. It's a home in Lexington County, in Richland County, and in a very neighborhood where there are houses worth $500,000 or more.
Ascot Subdivision is the name of the neighborhood, and it is a very nice neighborhood, very expensive homes. That's where they lived. There you see it. Something else that was very unusual about this case that had a lot of people talking, including community members. And Darcy, I don't know about you, but for me, for a long time, anytime I left the station, someone was asking me about this case. And what surprised a lot of people was the length of time it took Brett Parker to be arrested. And then you heard Sheriff Leon Lott taking the stand saying, there you go, there's the video, Sheriff Leon Lott taking the stand saying that, you know, they were trying to get all their facts straight and make sure that they had enough information before he was arrested. But he, being friends with Jack Parker, Brett Parker's father, actually met one-on-one on a personal level with Brett Parker to hear his story. He said he sat down with him at the kitchen table to hear his story, and that is something that's kind of unusual, something we don't normally hear in a case.
He actually said that he talked to him a number of times before he finally said, you know what, this story's not adding up. You need to turn yourself in. I think he used the comparison of a square peg and a round hole. The pieces are not coming together, so turn yourself in. And that's exactly what he did, and that's what brings us to where we are today. Again, we have been in the courtroom every day. J.R. Berry reporting live from outside the courtroom, courtroom 2A in the Richland County Courthouse, downtown Columbia. As that verdict was read less than 10 minutes ago, Brett Parker found guilty on both counts of murder and the death of his wife, Tammy Parker, and his former business partner, Brian Kapner-Hurst.
Looking at video there, or I'm not sure if that was the live look or video of Judge DeAndre Benderman, but now they'll be talking about the sentencing phase, which will be next. And obviously, as Darcy mentioned, anytime there's a guilty plea, there will be an appeal, and he will be able to appeal the case. But found guilty.
And this is a live look into the courtroom, and as you can see, I don't want to call it a media circus, but every media outlet in the Midlands obviously following this case very closely. You can see for yourself the microphones and the cameras and the families there. Difficult to tell from this angle whose family we're looking at, but we'll just watch in for just a moment and see if we can try to identify some of the folks who are there now. Okay, Andrea, do you recognize any of the folks who are sitting in the audience there?
No.
It appears, according to our producer, that most of the people who we're seeing are members of Tammy Parker's family.
Obviously, a lot of hugging. You know, one thing that it didn't get talked about so much during this case, but just really breaks my heart, is there's children involved in this. And now the children of Tammy Parker and Brett Parker have essentially lost their mother and their father. And, you know, obviously he was found guilty. He'll be going away for a long time. And it's just very sad. Same thing with Brian Kapner-Hurst. He was a parent as well. There's so many different victims in this case. Unfortunately, it's not just Tammy Parker. It's not just Brian Kapner-Hurst. Families have been completely destroyed by this. And by Brett Parker's actions on that day, you feel for everybody involved. Like Darcy said, one of the most emotional days of testimony was when Tammy Parker and Brett Parker's 14-year-old daughter broke down on the stand, testifying on behalf of her father, really. And of all the times that we were watching Brett Parker in this case, that was the time that he got the most emotional, is listening to her sob on the stand as she was talking about what happened. Looks like something's going on. We're going to listen in for just a second.
All right, you may be seated. And I did not ask any, you want to renew your motion?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, this time we would ask for judge to give us a verdict of not guilty on both counts.
All right, and you're renewing your motions from earlier?
Yes, Your Honor.
Motion for, your directed verdict motion?
Yes, that's right, Your Honor. We renewed the directed verdict motion on the same grounds, and if I need to specify those, I will for the record.
I think you put it on the record before the record.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, yes, ma'am. Any response? He's renewing his motion.
No, Your Honor. We were just asking you about your earlier ruling.
All right. For purposes of the record, motions are renewed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do want to put down there that we do want to renew our circumstantial evidence motion pursuant to the State v. Edwards. That's talking about 1989. That's 379, I think it's 379 South 2nd, 888. Just to specify that one in particular.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any response? Okay. All right. As to the motion, circumstantial evidence motion, you're objecting to me not charging that requested charge by the defense. The court, I find that, I think it's State v. Cherry, pretty much overturns that, and for that reason, I think the language that was given in the jury charge is an accurate statement of the law today. Therefore, I would deny the motion for a directed verdict. For all of the reasons that I stated earlier at the end of the state's case, at the end of the defense case, but your motion is preserved for the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Permission to approach the bench?
Yes, sir.
There you go.
Right. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, this time, should we get sentencing?
Let me see you all.
We're all here and he's got one speaking. We just have one from each family, a representative.
We can't hear, Jared. What?
She's been here forever. Look at the testimony. It's going
As you can see for yourself now, the attorneys have approached the bench, and what we're hearing from the courtroom, because it is as difficult for us to hear it here in the studio as it is for you at home, Judge DeAndre Benjamin has denied a motion for a directed verdict, which means the jury's decision will stand. What we're also learning from the courtroom is as soon as the jury's decision was read, that Brett Parker immediately turned around to say some words of comfort to his daughter Brooke, who obviously is taking this news very badly. Brett Parker found guilty on both counts of murder, one of which is in the death of his wife, Tammy Parker, and his former business partner, Brian Kapnahurst.
J.R. Berry has been standing by outside of this Richland County courtroom all day long. J.R.
You know, we're actually waiting for some family members to come out to get a reaction to this verdict, Darcy and Andrea. Yeah, Judge Benjamin just denied that motion. The defense wanted all circumstantial evidence dismissed from this case, but that motion has been denied. No emotion from Brett Parker as the verdict. The two guilty verdicts were read. But yeah, Darcy, as you mentioned, his 14-year-old daughter is taking the news quite hard, and Parker did turn around to comfort his daughter, who testified on her father's behalf just last week before the defense wrapped up their case. But again, we're just outside courtroom 2A here inside the Richland County Judicial Center. And again, Darcy and Andrew, we were hoping to bring you some reaction from family members of Tammy Parker and Brian Kapnerhurst, and we're going to stay out here a little while longer. Hopefully they'll be coming out momentarily, and when they do, we'll be talking with them. Back to you right now.
Jared, thank you. We are back live in the courtroom. It appears that the judge is leaving the courtroom again, but what is done is done. The decision has been made. Brett Parker found guilty on 2 counts of murder. A very emotional outburst from both sides of his family, from his in-laws and from the family of Kapnerhurst, and obviously from Brett Parker's family when he was found guilty. So we're looking in, not sure what's going on now. Just a moment before we checked in with JR, all the attorneys had approached the bench, but we're not quite sure what it was they were discussing.
We, however, do know this. There is no doubting this. The jury came back with a resounding verdict. Brett Parker guilty of 2 homicides. Of course, talking about Tammy Parker and Brian Kapnerhurst. There were 13 days of testimony, very emotional testimony. I think some people were surprised when Wendy Combs Kaiser took the stand, who says that she is now Brett Parker's girlfriend, that they had met at the Great Wolf Lodge in North Carolina just about 2 weeks after the murders took place. And I know for some people they were saying that just seems very soon to be moving on after your wife's murder.
Absolutely. That was another day that a lot of people were very interested in following that case closely, and it has been a packed courtroom most days. We're going to go back into the courtroom live now. You are looking at Brett Parker moments ago finding out that he could possibly spend a very long time behind bars after being found guilty on 2 counts of murder.
And one more time just about what was going on there as the attorneys were standing up at the bench. Judge Benjamin came back in the courtroom. The defense wanted to move to dismiss the circumstantial evidence in the case. However, she denied that. The circumstantial evidence obviously is circumstantial evidence will stand. But here's breaking news. They said that they were going to take just a 5-minute break, and then Judge Benjamin will come back into the courtroom for the sentencing. They're going to take a 5-minute break and then come back into the courtroom for the sentencing. Of course, we will be bringing you that.
Which doesn't normally happen a lot, that you get a sentencing the same day that the verdict is read, but that's what we're hearing now. Obviously, follow us online at WLTX.com and on Twitter and Facebook.
We'll see you at 11 o'clock.